on stage. I actually did think, right, what is the driest, most boring talk title I could come up with that would actually get accepted? So this was like a private competition to myself. I was trying to make it a bit more sexy to talk about, but it doesn't sound very interesting. It's not anything to do with global warming though, because the Al Gore track's actually tomorrow, so if you're interested in all that sort of stuff, the inconvenient fiction or inconvenient truth stuff's on later on. But my name is Sam Newman. You can call me Sam, because we're quite a close, intimate group, so feel free to say Sam. If you have questions throughout, just raise your hand. I'll make sure we're keeping us on time, so don't let us run into lunch. I actually work for a company called ThoughtWorks. We're actually a software development, custom software delivery consultancy. We do onshore and offshore work. We build software for people, it's pretty much what we do. I've been with the company about nearly 8 years now. We also do some product stuff. We've got Mingle, which is a storage tracking tool. We've got Go, which is like a continuous delivery tool. So if you do CI, it does a lot of release management stuff. And we've got Twist, which is a functional acceptance test tool. I will not mention any of that stuff again. If you want to talk about the work my company does or the products, or you want a job, because we're always hiring, grab me afterwards. I will not mention it again though. I also should mention that I'm not him out of Flight of the Conchords. I do know most of the words for sugar lumps. I don't know all of them, and I'm not that guy either. And in case you don't know who Flight of the Conchords are, I'm also not Claypole out of Rent a Ghost, which is another cultural reference you probably certainly won't know, nor am I Russell Brand. I'm also not the Aussie Rules football commentator, Sam Newman, who is famous for punching people and spitting on fans, but I do get his email, weirdly enough. We're actually here to talk about clouds, and it's probably always worth defining what cloud is at the beginning, because they mean all things to all men, and different things to monkeys. My definition of cloud for the purposes of this talk, and specifically the sort of trade-offs I'm going to be talking about, I'm talking about clouds here that provide you some form of compute on which to build your own services. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is equally applicable for sort of platform as a service stuff, but there are some other considerations. We'll touch on some of those, but mostly I'm talking about here are places where you go and get compute to build your software, build your services. That can be inside your own data centers on manually managed kit. It could be on VMware stuff. It can be work with managed hosting providers. It could be going externally for some sort of infrastructure as a service provider like Amazon or Rackspace. But that's what I'm talking about. And I'm also talking about this lovely sort of division that's come out from, I'm assuming, one of the vendor's marketing departments, which is trying to divide the world into these two lovely categories of public and private. This is a frequently used technique in marketing and branding, and also used in politics. Let's push everyone into one of two camps. Now, obviously, what the trick here is that you want to be private. Of course, you want to be private. It's computing data serious. So what they've done here is say, well, we're private, you see. And do you know what that really means? It means they're public. And you know what that means. Okay? It's like the pro-choice. It's pro-life in America is a really interesting one, because it kind of implies if you're not pro-life, you're anti-life. And that means you're evil, right? So this is kind of where we are, right? We are a private cloud, therefore those guys are public. So the private cloud guys, they kind of see themselves, they see themselves in a certain light. So you have this idea that if you're public, it's a free-for-all. That you're getting, your data's out there in the open, you've got no idea what's happening. Somebody else is stealing your compute. My machine goes slow when they run it. And if you're private, you've got this steaming tower, this gleaming spires, where everything's fantastic and wonderful. And of course, this is something that's a great image to be put out by vendors that are traditionally entrenched in maybe more conservative spaces. Now, of course, people like me, you startup-y type guys, I'm hanging out with my hipster friends at the coffee shop, talking about how awesome and smart we are, and maybe saying machine learning a lot. Well, we love these infrastructure service providers like Amazon, because we get like this infinite toolbox of stuff, and there's no stuffy corporates in the way. I can plug together, and I can build whatever I want, even if I really, really shouldn't be, but I can. And of course, this sort of other world, this traditional enterprise world of manually configured resources, and they say, oh yeah, I'll get it boxed you at some point, and they keep promising me this really flexible on-demand service inside my own infrastructure, but it never really arrives. And when it does, it's just some guy operating vCenter to give me a VMware. So basically, it doesn't arrive, and when it does, it's really lousy. So, the experiences are much the same as you've been forever, which, quite a long time. Okay. So here we are. So we're in this place where we're looking at this big divide between the public world and the private world. These sort of words put out there only by the people pushing themselves as a private cloud vendor. And the reality is that this is just marketing, this is just trying, and the world does not fit into two neat buckets. There's actually a whole collection of things that we need to look at when considering what is it that makes this platform, this solution, this vendor viable for what it is we're trying to do. And I'm hoping that we're going to apply some critical thinking to this whole process. Critical thinking is this wonderful term. It's seen a lot more actually in schools and things. It's a process by which we take lots of data from lots of different sources and apply our own judgment and our own criteria to actually look at what we're being told and say, is that really true? What is it that's important to me? What do I think about it? Actually, most enterprises where I work, and that's my bread and butter, is working with organisations. I would be happy with just some thinking going on, not critical thinking. Nonetheless, a lot of decisions seem to get made by knee-jerk reactions. But nonetheless, we're going to imagine a brave new world in which all of us around here are looking to bring in some new kind of provider for some compute resource on which to build a great enterprise, or perhaps we're looking at a new system that we want to, a new provider to move kit to, or we're just interested in what's going on. It all comes back actually to what it is you need. If you're thinking about who's good for you, you've got to think about what's important to you. Now, I can't possibly tell you what's important to all of you because I don't know your particular set of challenges. I don't know your domain. I don't know what it is you're trying to build, and therefore it would be arrogant of me to assume that I will know the selection criteria that you should be selecting that are important to you. However, there is a general set of things that are important that you do need to consider. The different trade-offs you make when you're looking and comparing and baking off an AWS versus a Rackspace versus an Azure versus your own internal corporate operations team versus vCenter versus a cold service, a tender, a level 3. There's a common set of criteria that you need to consider, and that's really what I want to talk about today, to get you thinking about your own place now, your own problem space now. What are the things I need to care about? Start at the beginning, location. I don't mean here location as in, is it on my data center, is it on someone else's data center? I mean quite literally geographical location. Physically, where is my compute in the world? Very simple. Where is it? It's surprising actually how many people who build systems and deploy onto managed hosting providers don't actually know geographically where those people are, which has always surprised me. I don't need to go in their building, I need to know where they are geographically. Why? Because data moves. Now, unless everything I do with that data stays inside my one location, I've got to move that data around. That has implications. So where are my consumers? That's important too, because I've got to ship my data out to those people. Two things come into play, really, really important. I'm dealing with a client right now that has both of these challenges, and it's quite tricky. They're actually looking to deploy a solution and the client is actually in the Middle East. So we're looking at this issue right now. First issue, well, if I'm here and I've got to get my data there, or they're there and they've got to get data to me, where am I? Latency. So know and understand what the latency requirements are. So I'm going to come back to time and time again. Most of the selection criteria, when you're thinking about who you're going to apply, are actually driven by the business requirements you have for the systems you are building. If any of you are doing public-facing websites, you probably should have an understanding about what is acceptable latency for your clients, your customers. Hopefully, you've got means of measuring that. There are systems like BrowserMob or Gomez, traditionally, that allow you to actually monitor latency to your public-facing websites for a large number of different sites all around the world. So when you're looking at a different vendor and moving your kit to a different place, you need to understand this. The second thing, which is often, and this is how you can trade off, right? You can think about latency. Okay, well, yeah, they're there and they're really cheap, but they're really far away. So the latency is going to stink, but maybe we trade that cost off by edge caching or some variation thereof. There's something else you often can't trade off when considering about where it is that you're going to bring up your infrastructure, where your cloud's going to live, and that's an issue of data protection. Is the issue of data protection. So, as a UK, we operate within the UK, and actually we're part of the EU data safe harbour regions. That means that I can share my data as an organisation. I can move client-specific data from the UK to Ireland to Italy, because we all actually have legislation that's as strong as each other. And under EU laws, we're allowed to do that. We can move that around. Moving that data though to the US is a little bit tricky, especially with the Patriot Act nowadays. Moving that out to the Middle East, forget it. So you need to understand within your own organisations what data is that I care about. Is that data uniquely identifiable data? If you've got that kind of data, you will have a data protection officer somewhere in your organisation, and if you don't know you've got one, it may be you. Someone who's responsible ultimately for what happens and how that stuff moves around. You need to understand that. It's the kind of thing that pretty much, if you've got these constraints, it shortens your list of providers pretty quick. Although, again, I have worked with more than one company that had no awareness that their data protection existed, which is very scary, shifting data all over the place. It does happen. The nice thing about the latency stuff is that we are in a much better place for actually being able to test that stuff now. On to the next thing. Another market share phrase that people like, especially Amazon, like using, and that's the term elasticity. Elasticity is the ability you have, your compute resource, to scale up or down to accommodate demand. It's actually really two things when you get down to it. It's a function of the lead time. When I want something, how quickly can I get it? And commitment. Once I got it, how long am I committed to paying for it? So on the one extreme, you've got something like an Amazon, where my lead time is typically a small number of minutes, depending on the AMI you want to boot up. And the shortest commitment, and actually the longest commitment actually for an instance, is 1 hour. I bring it up, I'm committed to paying that for that instance for an hour. I can turn it off, but I still pay for the hour. You've got services in the middle, things like Slice Host and Lino. Slice Host is an interesting one. The turnaround time to bring up a VM, minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. My commitment's a month. I'm paying for that month. And then probably at the other extreme, you've got some of the less effective organisations I've worked with where they have a smaller amount of kit available to them. They may be looking at 9 months to get a new piece of kit wrapped up. And that's not uncommon. One of the largest organisations I work with, they actually only provision their kit every 3 years, because they want to buy their kit in big chunks because it simplifies their support contract arrangements. So if you miss that 3-year window, getting new kit is difficult, and when you do, from the beginning of starting the process to select a new hardware vendor, to that kit actually being available, it takes 9 months, because they have to identify the hardware providers, they have to get the kit wrapped up in their data centers, they have to test it, so on and so forth. Many organisations are getting a lot better at this. The best organisations I've worked with can typically provision a wrap kit, have it Pixie booted up in a matter of a few weeks. Average is months. But many big organisations now are actually able to put infrastructure, frameworks, platforms in their own system to make them much more responsive. OpenStack and OpenNebula, Eucalyptus, JCloud are things that are trying to give us the more elasticity, but of course you're still bounded by the compute available to you. So elasticity, how important is it for you that you can scale up quickly and scale down quickly and actually only pay for what you need? It's not a criteria. This is a fun one. So your service level agreements. When you go and talk to a new provider, and this goes for the existing providers, this goes for people that may already be within your own organisations, that may already be supporting your infrastructure, what SLAs are available to you? Because you are probably building something, I would imagine, for other people. Those other people have expectations about your availability. They have expectations about the durability of the data they give you. They have expectations about how long you'll be down for during maintenance releases. Of course, the pretty obvious thing that comes out of an SLA is that you can only offer your business, your clients, your consumers an SLA that is as strong as the weakest SLA that you are being offered. I've seen some really interesting stats from people that claim that they offer 4 nines availability and they're running on Amazon. Amazon for a region, and a region in Amazon is like a separate cloud, so all compute, and then a region is subdivided into availability zones, kind of like data centers, and inside an availability zone are machines. Amazon offer you a 99.7% availability SLA for the whole region. So that means at best, you can pass that on to your customers if your service has no single point of failure, running on multiple machines in multiple availability zones. If you run in one availability zone, you do not get that SLA from Amazon, and you therefore cannot pass it on to your customers. The big outage there was in the East Coast, it took a lot of big names, including Heroku, off the web. In Amazon, a lot of people who went down had their entire systems in one availability zone. There were other issues around that. So at least understand what the SLAs are that are being offered. Another problem is a lot of these providers are quite new. They'll have the word beta sticker all over it. And you'll look around and you won't find SLAs for things. Now, if those SLAs, if you're looking for things that are important to you and you cannot find an SLA from the provider that gives you confidence in that service, there's a problem. Understand what's important to you in terms of durability. And also actually look at the penalty clauses. A lot of people say, oh yeah, they offer 11 nines durability for their data. Fantastic, great. What's the penalty clause? There is no penalty clause? Well, so what they're saying is they're making a promise, but if they can't deliver on it, sorry, my bad. Right? If the penalty clause looks pretty healthy, good. If it doesn't cover what you're going to lose out, that's a consideration. When selecting a new vendor, you're going to be doing effectively, formally or informally, a piece of IT risk management. And the SLAs out there are really important. And if an organisation isn't able to say what they are and tell you what they're going to do if they don't meet them, that will tell you an awful lot about the organisation. And if they've got the word beta all over the place and no SLAs, then that's great, but just be wary if you're running your production stuff like that, right? So, please look at the fine print. Many people don't. Control. This is typically where the Amazon and Rackspace fanboys like myself will beat up on traditional internally hosted infrastructure. And we'll say things like, yeah, I can write an API, up comes my image, write another API call, my firewall changes. And actually I strongly believe that programmatic control of your infrastructure is the future. Very simple reasons. One, it's very easy to test and do repeatedly. Two, it's extremely easy to version control exactly what you did when. Three, traceability and auditability are significantly improved. There's lots of very, very, very good reasons why API-driven infrastructure is the future. However, it isn't the be-all and end-all when we talk about what control means. Now at Amazon, I can bring up a box. I can't control how finely I slice a piece of hardware though. I've got some ability to pick different sizes, but I can't easily go in and say, actually, you know what? I want a smaller size instance than is available on Amazon. In one of our clients, we run 50 VMs on one server, 50 VMs, which for the use case we're using it for, which are isolated build and test environments, is perfect. To run that same thing on Amazon, because we don't have control over how small or how we slice the physical resources of the environment, the price point is blown way out. It's about 10 times more expensive for that particular use case. Now, internally, you may not have the API-driven control. I think that's coming to many organizations. But you do have the ability to work out how you divide your physical and virtual resources up. So there's almost control across a couple of different axes on that one. Again, what's important to you when you're building your services? Is it more important to be able to bring the box up, change the firewall rules, all those things at the click of a button? Or is it more important you need to eke every single last ounce out of the physical kit that you've already got available to you? Different trade-offs, different places. There's also an extent to which this is about the relationships involved with doing this. Within your own organisations, you might have change request processes that can be quite arduous. It ties back into the D type to an extent. Portability, I struggle to find a really good slide for this one, but I like the little carrot that scares the crap out of me there. Okay. This tends to be less of an issue when we're talking about compute infrastructure at the level of the operating system, because then really the extent to which we worry about portability is, well, if I'm dealing with an operating system, if we can get that operating system somewhere else, you know what? I'm probably good to go. I'm probably okay with that and how I will deal with this. It becomes a lot more problematic when you start looking at higher abstracted services, higher level services like platform as a service. How tied in am I? I don't like using the word lock-in. This concept of portability here is there's going to be some level of investment to work with that infrastructure provider. How much of that is sunk effort that I can't really use somewhere else? We're actually in a fairly good place and getting better, I think, with this. The OpenStack guys, for example, so OpenStack, if you know, is basically an initiative that originally came out of NASA and Rackspace working together, and they are producing an open source framework for doing infrastructure as a service. There's some level of underlying virtualization agnosticism there, so there are plans to support both Zen and KVM. They've got a lot of backing from people that want to play catch up to Amazon. One of the nice things about them, beyond the fact that if one it all works, you'll be able to go externally to a hosted OpenStack cloud or run it on your own kit, is that they're going to aim to be API compliant with Amazon, effectively using Amazon's own APIs for controlling the infrastructure as a de facto standard. Now, obviously, they don't have feature parity in all things, but when it comes to compute and storage, the abstractions are fairly similar. The great thing for us is as we see tooling being developed, SDKs, there's a huge wealth of tools that are being developed for Amazon. As OpenStack implementations become more common, and there's more of your own sort of, if you're working with managed hosting providers right now, you may well find that you can reuse a lot of those tools. The portability at the back angle is not that much of a problem, actually becoming less of a problem. On the other hand, you might be in a situation right now where you've got a lot of sunk costs, for example, in things like vCenter, so VMware-based monitoring and controlling systems and the operational side of that. And that might be the right place for you to spend your money. But even VMware are now moving more into a space of actual, hybrid cloud. Hybrid means both public and private at the same time. So you get both the fight and the castle, you understand? Anyway. Cost is a doozy, and this is often where things get really complicated when you're trying to do bake-offs. There are a large multitude of models out there for how much this stuff costs. Amazon, for example, will give you pure pay-as-you-go, but there are 3 different pricing models within that pay-as-you-go umbrella. There's the concept of spot pricing, where you bid on unused capacity. There's a concept of on-demand. There's a concept of reservations. You can pay for reservation for a year, and if you spin up your instance, it gets cheaper. You've then got, when you go to managed hosting providers, they may lease kit to you, in which case it could be a year. They may take your own kit and rack it up. So then you're having to think, okay, so now I've got to pay for the hardware, which is sunk cost for a year or 3 years or as long as the life cycle. I've got my support licensing agreements. You've got your staffing costs, and these are all trade-offs. The expertise needed to run well Amazon or a Rackspace type cloud environment for your services is actually could be very different to the set of skills you currently have in-house. And actually some of the biggest mistakes I've seen are people taking all the standard operations stuff they do on the internal stuff where it's all ad hoc, every environment is a snowflake type world in their own operation centers, and just throwing stuff out onto the cloud and assuming it's all going to be fine. So it's actually an ongoing cost base in terms of thinking about how you tune that right for your organization. Zynga is a really interesting example here. Zynga, you may know, do the Farmville and the monster game and that thing with zombies. I'm sure there's something with zombies. But the game with the farms where you do your crops. Now they've actually been a big poster child for Amazon, but that's not the whole story. What they do when they release a new product is they're sticking these things out. These are social games. The emerging complexity of games driven off social networks is quite high. And so while they do a high degree of testing, they cannot possibly know what's going to happen. typically when people are going to launch a new offering, and actually any startup, when you put a new offering out there, you have the challenge of the thundering herd. What happens is someone finds out about it, the viral effect spreads, and suddenly you have this huge wall of people coming at your service. Now, the key thing is, most of those people won't hang around. But if you can capture 1%, 10% of that traffic and have them coming back, you've got a viable product. If your site goes down and that thundering herd hits you from a TechCrunch, a Dig, or whatever that might be, you might not get a second bite of the cherry. So what Zynga do is, when they're first launching an initiative or launching a new version of a game, they're saying, well, we're not quite sure what's going to happen here, but at this phase of our operation, what we really value is the ability to scale up to handle the unpredictable loads, and actually the ability to withstand that buffer. So they're sort of valuing the elasticity and availability, and that's their prime concern with launching new offering. But when all the peaks and troughs of the traffic work themselves out and it gets to more of a steady state, they can start to look, okay, so what's happening right now? Looking at the scale, so what parts of this stuff could we actually run more cost effectively in our own infrastructure? And I'll start saying, okay, we can take that out, we'll put it into our own systems, we'll take that out, put it into our own systems. Now they're sort of shifting that. So initially we're worried about staying up, being able to react to the demand to allow us to stay up. But then what we're going to do is say, okay, then we're going to bring cost in as a more important aspect. How do we bring some of the stuff in-house so we get the best of both worlds? But almost through the life cycle of the product there, which one of these actually is important to them does shift. Now obviously this does speak to a high degree of sophistication on their parts. The ability to take one system spread over, Amazon bits and internal stuff, internal infrastructure. But if you can invest in that kind of expertise, you can really tune every last ounce out of your computing resource. Question?
Yeah. I'm just wondering. I mean, what you're saying is that the operations in this private data center are actually more cost efficient than Amazon has to offer. In a way that means that economies of scale don't work, because obviously Amazon is operating a much larger data center, and they should have a lot of knowledge about how to do that cost efficiently. Mm-hmm. And do you have any idea why it still works out, why the numbers still work out?
So the question was around surely Amazon should be more cost effective than Zynga's own data centers, because Amazon are working they're working at huge efficiencies of scale, and this is true, right? I mean, they run 1,000 to 2,000 servers per engineer. They're getting racks every week rather than other organisations getting them every month. They've got very efficient data centres and lots of smarts. So yes, the economies of scale back there was great. However, remember the example I gave earlier, which was about our particular use case, where for us running a rack is more expensive than running a rack in Amazon in general. But for our specific cases, we wanted to slice and dice an image in a very different way to get different aspects out of it. So the issue is, in terms of how they apportion back resources to you, that's a general case that they're solving it for. That's the first thing. There are obviously, the second thing is, people might have different performance characteristics they can achieve on bespoke kit that could only be achieved in Amazon with more boxes. For example, the elastic load balancers are good, they're not as good as having your own F5. So you might need to do daisy chain load balancers, all those sorts of things. You might need more machines physically to handle a load on Amazon than you may need internally. And Zynga actually have thousands of servers anyway, so they've already got a lot of cost efficiencies in terms of management. I know plenty of internally organisations that already have lots of servers that may not have you bringing in as many, but still manage to achieve the similar sorts of ratios of sys administration time to rack time. The problem when doing a true bake-off of costs between an Amazon or a rack space and your own internal offerings often comes down to the fact that a lot of costs inside your own organisations are more hidden. Because you've got people already on your payroll that are looking after these boxes, and that's why often Amazon can look a lot more expensive. But if you've already got kit that's a sunk cost that you've already paid for, and you're just going to ignore it and go and use Amazon, you've got a pretty good reason why you're doing that, ignoring that unused kit. And the key thing is, it is important for you to look at your own particular case. Now, Amazon has this thing called the simple price calculator. I think they have dropped the word simple on account of the price calculator not being simple. But nonetheless, you can put all these things in and come out with a number. The issue is that services like that, and actually services like externally hosted managing providers, is much more obvious in terms of the costs are. Most organisations find it very hard when running operations centres internally to actually give you a cost per VM when you consider all the other aspects that are going on.
There's one other aspect to the question, I think. Amazon is one of the only vendors that actually use their own stuff, so they're getting their compute for free.
Yeah.
And guys like Microsoft and Azure are making a huge loss on Azure because they're not using it for any of their own stuff.
Yeah, so the comment there was that Amazon are using their stuff for their own purposes, so they're kind of getting some of their compute for free. There's a few things going on there. The other reason why Amazon might be more expensive is they actually need to make money on it, right? That Amazon have overstated and do overstate the extent to which they've historically run their stuff on their cloud. They certainly, though, made more of their own mistakes in private. I know Google were not running any services on Google App Engine for Remote Live. I don't know that Microsoft are doing the same thing. There's almost a different aspect there, which is the extent to which they're going to make their mistakes in public rather than private. But yeah, I mean, the cost efficiencies may or may not be there, and I think the issue for us right now is some people say Amazon look really expensive, significantly more expensive. And if you've got your own kit already and your own infrastructure, they can look quite expensive. What we don't really know right now is whether or not it's overly expensive because there actually isn't as much competition in the market as we might like, because really you don't have equivalency of feature set. I think you can bake them off against Rackspace and see what works for you. Of course, you get other things with Rackspace. You'll get a bit more of a personal touch. You can have somebody that looks after your infrastructure because they're a standard. They do manage hosting as well outside of their cloud-based offerings. So those things also come into play when you're thinking about cost. The issue with Amazon is an API. I could just run an API, it's great. I can't shout at an API, right, when something goes wrong. So some of the personal touch stuff doesn't really come out in Amazon offerings because they've grown massively. And I say to someone who runs training courses for them, so I can say that. Right? But there are other trades, there are other things that are important to your organisation. We'll come on to that actually towards the end, a bit on. But so when you're considering this as cost, there's another thing that really comes out an awful lot when we're talking about these things and that people talk about, is this idea of isolation. I have this concern that this thing I've got that I'm running might be running on a machine with somebody else's stuff, and that gives me concern, that gives me jitters. Why does that give me concern? Why is it getting me jitters? There's actually two reasons, typically it breaks down to. One is actually really a matter of around predictability, and really I mean by predictability of performance. This is the idea that somebody else running on the same physical infrastructure as me can adversely affect my performance in a way that I'm not prepared for or do not understand. Now, some hosting providers are better than others at creating Chinese walls around resource, and some virtualization technology allows you to do more. But a lot of that stuff only operates down to the physical machine level, doesn't actually necessarily deal neatly with some of the stuff that's happening more downstream or upstream, routers, network switches, firewalls, all those sorts of things. A really great example of this is a number of a couple of our clients were using small Amazon instances for build service, and they're running them out of the US. Quite cheap machines, builds were fine. And then the US would wake up and the performance would go through the floor. Because what was happening was effectively the I/O performance on the machines was basically bursting up. So you thought you had good I/O performance. Now your compute hasn't changed, your memory hasn't changed, the amount of locally attached ephemeral disk hasn't changed, but your I/O performance profile changes when other people are using that box, because what you thought you had is not what you had. So actually we had to go to larger instances of Amazon purely, and all we needed was more I/O. But we couldn't scale up I/O independently. I think let's go to a bigger instance. And then within organisations that are just using normal standard virtualization stacks, they may have even less control out of affecting how much one person's performance affects another person's performance. I do know, for example, that VMware give you the ability to oversubscribe physical resources to VMs. So you could go to an internal operations center and say, right, my process needs 10 gig of memory, and okay, here's a VM with 10 gig of memory. You may not know that under the hood, you're running alongside another VM with 10 gigs of memory, and the machine has, well, 14 or 16 gigs of memory. You can do that. You may not know. And so suddenly one guy's memory shoots up, and at that point you have to vMotion your image off. So there's also the extent to which you go onto the isolation. So when talking to people about this VMs, where are your guidelines here in terms of how you're going to impact this? Now, Amazon allow you to run single tenancy kit now, but it's not for reasons of performance. It's actually not about compliance, which we'll come on to next. But understand that, and also bear in mind that your networking kit is something else again. I mean, at the VM level, your hypervisor technology can ring fence parts of your NIC bandwidth to certain processes. But even so, if you've got stuff storming routers and switches elsewhere, you need to have the right level of governance happening to make sure that you don't get. It's why people switch off things like multicast, right? It's also partly because of this. When you guys have any heavy compliance? Any of you have to do with PCI? Heard of PCI level compliance?
We sell to banks.
Pardon?
We sell to banks.
You sell to banks, so you have to do a PCI. Probably, yeah. Well, it's when you have to handle credit card numbers. You see lots of different types of compliance when you go into organisations I work with. Sarbanes-Oxley is a really common one, but actually it's fairly easy to deal with. It's like IT and all these sorts of things. Things like Sarbanes-Oxley came out the back of Enron. It's actually, when you get down to it, is actually fairly sensible. What happens though is it often gets implemented in overly draconian ways. PCI is something different again. To be PCI level compliant, you have to be when you're handling credit card numbers at a certain and depending on the volume at which you handle those credit card details, depends on how many hoops you have to jump through. Now there's something in PCI level compliance, I can't remember what level it kicks into, I can't remember if it's level 2 or level 1, I think it's level 2, which talks about you having physical security down to the network level of all infrastructure. So that means that auditors would need to check that you're doing those things, but actually have to go and visit your kit. So, bye-bye Amazon, right? So until October of last year, you could not run any PCI compliant system on an Amazon. Couldn't do it. Because the auditors were not allowed to go visit there. Your auditors, your client could not go to that data center where Amazon run their kit to go look at the box and say, yes, it's secure. Because by definition, that's insecure for somebody else. The product manager for Amazon Europe, for example, is not allowed into the data center and has never been. He knows geographically where they are. He's not allowed in. So they're not going to let your auditors in. It was October of last year, and Rackspace actually got this earlier, where they became what they call PCI compliant service providers, which means you can now host your solutions on their infrastructure, and that part of the PCI compliance that applies to the host is handled by them. It's kind of weird actually, we saw this big, almost 180-degree switch. We saw organizations that couldn't even think about going to Amazon or Rackspace or other external providers because of PCI, and now suddenly that all of these guys are now PCI compliant for the service provider. That's a big chunk of the legislation, the compliance you have to deal with is now being handled by a third party as part of your normal costs. So they've gone, great, we're just going to go there, because there's a whole chunk of stuff we don't need to deal with anymore. Now, some of this compliance stuff is stuff that you just can't change, and PCI is a good example, but a lot of these hosting providers are caught up. A lot of this stuff you are maybe not down to the process itself, it might be down to draconian implementation. So Sarbanes-Oxley, for example, it can be quite difficult to change that to make these things available. The key thing is if you're working in an organisation where you've got regulatory responsibilities, where your systems have to be audited and compliant and all that things, find out that guy and track him down and ask him lots of questions before you build this stuff and before you get these guys in the loop, and ask them all the nice questions and they'll help you out. Remember one other thing, like auditors when they come in will say, okay, your processes match what the requirements say they should match and you're doing them, that's great. They never say whether or not what you're doing is sensible or not. There's still some spheres, Certainly in the UK, you just can't put out, you can't put on a lot of these providers, and you can't put on Amazon and things like that. My dad runs a small charity, and part of what they do is they actually send data to the NHS. He has to run that with dedicated lease line that cannot be used for other traffic. Small charity, huge cost to a dedicated lease line. So if you're in that world, a lot of these avenues may just be closed off to you completely. However, doesn't mean you have to host that yourself. You may be able to go out to a provider who offer those sorts of services. So we've run through a whole load of stuff, right, in that. And none of it really neatly falls into these notions of what is public or not, what is private. They don't even really fall into internal or external. What does that mean anymore? Internal to me, what I look after it? Well, the only real difference is who's paying for it, and maybe a level of control. But I can still achieve all that by going to a managed hosting provider. Amazon's further blurring the lines between these things with things like their virtual private cloud. They're now using the word private cloud because it suits them. Or you get a private cloud, or you get VPC. You can run lease lines in with them, you can run these things over VPNs. So the world's much more murky, so these distinctions are pretty meaningless, and instead we want to be thinking about these other things. Location. We're going to be looking at the elasticities, the lead times, the commitment. We're going to be looking at the SLAs associated with these services that we're going to get. We're looking at the control we've got over the resources. We're looking at how much they cost. And, the isolation that is available to us for our solution, and how predictable that's going to be, and the support we have for whatever compliance and legislation we have to run through. Now the key thing is this is almost like the superset of the list that you should probably be considering. But you guys understand your domain better, and you can probably collapse that down to the things that really are important to you. And the key thing as well, when you're doing these sorts of exercises, thinking about what we're trying to do, trying to make a movement, is some of these things are more important than others. So you can do fun things like pick the ones you want, stick on a table, do scores. People get really involved in all this, using scoring systems. Managers love seeing dashboards and things. Actually, there is, as long as you give, the hardest thing here, right, is like these axes actually that I've outlined are actually the easiest thing to get your head around. The harder thing is what is it you need, and therefore the model by which you score. Proportionally, how important are these things to be done? I've used sliders as well for this sort of stuff. So I actually like using trade-off sliders. And again, right, you'll be surprised when you think about those things I talked about, how few of them are actually driven by IT decision making. Most of it actually gets driven by the businesses, what they need, the requirements they have for their systems. Certainly you're looking at the SLAs, certainly you're looking at things like elasticity, compliance, all of those things are things that your business stakeholders, the people who build the consumers of your system are really, really going to care about. So working with them, to say where are the trade-offs you want, is cost much more, is that really the thing that's really most important to us, or is it elasticity? Or maybe it shifts at different phases like the Bazinga guys. And of course the hard thing is getting back to what we need. Before we wrap up, so does anyone know who this is? This is a guy called Rory Sutherland. He did a TED talk, really interesting TED talk about 2009 or 2010, and he's like a brand guy, he's an ad guy, right? So obviously I've been poo-pooing his marketing terms, obviously I should poo-poo him as well, but he's got some interesting stuff. One of the things he talks about is intangible value, and the importance of intangible value in the world. The things I've been talking about are tangible. They are features, they are value we get based on some physical characteristics of the thing we are buying. And his thing is that as the world grows and the population grows, we've got finite resources, so either we have to accept that we're going to get less stuff, or we have to find a different way to give value. And he thinks that intangible value we get from an object that isn't directly attributable to some physical characteristic, like, see, I feel good when I buy Apple stuff, right? There's nothing intrinsic about it just because I'm an Apple fanboy, so I feel good about it, right? That's intangible value. You didn't get that. I don't know if I feel better buying Windows Ultimate Home Edition Awesome Pro. I don't know if I get more intangible. Anyway, but that's the thing. So he told this really interesting story about, you guys know shredders. Some of you probably know shredders. Shredders are this little sort of square, shredded wheat type cereal we get here and in Canada. And in Canada, they were really interested in coming up with a new way to get people engaged. The products, they came up with a new product called diamond trays. So the key thing to understand is with a square, normal tray is a square, diamond trays are diamond. It's quite confusing, so when they came out with this, they had this handy chart so you could tell the difference between what a diamond tray was and what a square tray was. So there's a square tray there with old underneath it. Now, of course, you can't launch a product like this, the diamond shreddy, without serious thoughts. There's actually some great videos on YouTube of the real blind tasting members of the Canadian public, where they would give them diamond shreddies, diamonds, and square shreddies, and ask them to taste them and tell them what they preferred. And a lot of people preferred diamond shreddies because they tasted more interesting, apparently. But then, of course, the people were worried that the diamond shreddies were short term. There was this little, you have like limited edition chocolate bars that will go away. So no, it's okay. The way we're going to resolve this is we're going to have a combo pack where we're going to have both diamond shreddies, half the pack will be diamond shreddies and half the pack will be square shreddies. So we'll have a combo pack with both of them in there, so both sets of fans are happy. Right? Now, please, a little bit jokey, but sales of shreddies went up, right? Now, what additional value has actually been gained and given to you by the diamond? None. Right? Physically, it's the same as a square shreddy, but back. Now, all the stuff I talked about was tangible value, and I would hope that when you're selecting your stuff, you're basing this on tangible value, because your bosses, your stakeholders, your shareholders, we don't like you just making decisions on a whim. It's more pointed. I like how it's at 45 degrees where the other one's at 90 degrees, so I'm going to buy that instead, right? Now, I am not saying that intangible value is evil, and in fact, there's one piece of intangible value that I haven't mentioned today, and it's very hard to put down on some checklist of features that you get from some private cloud, some public cloud, on Amazon or Azure or wherever else, and that's one of trust. And by trust, I mean a company that's clear about what it says it will do and does what it says it will do. Okay? You can't get that from something that's on a checklist. I don't get more trust buying an expensive thing from the expensive version of a product from a company, less expensive version of a company, of a product from a company. Right? I get more trust from the product saying what it will do and doing it. And trust isn't something you buy, trust is something that accrues over time. Many of my colleagues and friends in the tech industry often bemoan the fact that lots of enterprise organisations seem so stuck in the mud. They won't try this new product. They're great, it's awesome, look, it works. Why are we stuck in buying IBM? Why do we always buy Microsoft? Why are we buying all Oracle stuff? Actually, when you get down to it, a lot of it is because the organisations trust those products to deliver what they've been delivering. So if you're thinking about a change in your own organisations, public, private, whatever it is, it could be about cost base, it could be about the isolation, where it is, how fast it is, whatever it might be, how awesomely cool it is. Look, I can write movie code and it just runs for me out of GitHub. Doesn't matter, you can't overcome the trust barrier. You should trust that product. And the people signing off those things should trust it too. So you've got to find a way to build that. And there are lots of ways of doing that, but this is important to you as well. So anyway, that's my kind of rantiness over for today. So I just wondered if there's any questions.
I have a question. I heard somewhere that all big decisions, buying stuff, is basically based on intangible value, not on tangible. In the end, it comes down to the intangible value, the trust, the feeling good of buying something from.
Yeah, well, it can be a bit more complex than that. I don't think it's always about trust. I think it's often more about, it's that old adage which is no one ever got fired for buying IBM, right? The intangible value there was, it's the go-to solution, and anyone else might just have made that decision, and if it turns out to be the wrong one, I would get fired for it. So that's true. So there the trust might be, does your boss trust you to make the right decision for him? There's a lot of that happens, and in larger enough organisations, you're dealing with that. You're absolutely dealing with that. And then that's the issue is at certain levels in organisation, decisions Every single decision made, even the largest organisation, makes perfect sense at some place. And I've worked with start-up companies with 3 people, and one of my most recent clients has 110,000 people working in IT. Every decision makes sense at some level. You just might not be at that level. That decision to buy some arbitrary product that's clearly not fit for purpose that he made on the golf course made perfect sense to him, and he said, I understand it. You're just in the coal face dealing with all this muck and crap at the end of the day, right? It's not a good story, it's just kind of where we are. Actually, something else that we see a lot is people don't often realise that not making a decision is making a decision. Sometimes, we've already got this thing around, so we're just going to use it, right? TFS is a really interesting one. We do a lot of .NET development, and the way we develop code is we check in an awful lot. We check in per pair 10 to 30 times a day. It's pretty standard for us. TFS doesn't like that kind of workflow. Most organisations we find that have TFS never made a conscious decision to buy TFS. They never made a conscious decision to use it. They had it because they had an MSDN enterprise license. So no one has ever gone through what's important to us. They took one factor, it's already there, and they ignored everything else. And this is the problem, you're right. At some level, there's always crazy decisions aren't getting made, and all you can do is try and influence the area around you. That's all you can do. Any other questions? It's a bit technical. I do know about a lot of deep, nasty technical stuff from all these providers. If you do want anything, do ask me. But other than that, thank you.
John?